Heroes, Chapter 11. Lieutenant Lawrence LaSalle, U.S. Marine Corps, holder of the Silver Star for acts of heroism in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal in the South Pacific, hero of newsreels and radio broadcasts, was coming home on furlough. He was scheduled to arrive on the 3:10 p.m. train from Boston on the 3rd of July, 1943. On that hot and humid afternoon, a crowd gathered at the Monument Depot to greet his arrival, including kids from the rec center, Joey LeBlanc, Louis Arabelle, Marie Lacroix, and me among them, and parents who knew that Larry LaSalle had been a bright Pied Piper for their children in the bleakness of the Depression. I looked towards Monument Park, impatient for Nicole to join us. As a volunteer now with the Monument Red Cross, she was preparing food kits for servicemen that day, and said she would join us in time for Larry LaSalle's arrival. I placed a foot on the rail, hoping to feel the slight trembling that would announce the train's approach. The heat of the rail burned through the sole of my shoe. Turning, I saw Nicole coming into view through the haze of heat. She wore a dark blue skirt and a white blouse. She waved to me as she hurried towards the depot. At the same time, the chug of engine, blast of horn, and hiss of steam announced the arrival of the train from Boston. A moment later, Larry LaSalle stood on the platform, resplendent in the green uniform with the lieutenant's bars on his shoulders and the ribbons and medals on his chest. He smiled, the old movie star smile, skin tanned and glowing, small wrinkles around his eyes as he squinted down at us. We cheered as he stepped down from the platform and walked towards our group, that touch of Fred Astaire still in his walk, but something different about him. His slenderness was knife-like now, lethal, his features sharper, nose and cheekbones. I remembered how hard it had been to think of him as a fighting Marine when he announced his enlistment, but seeing his lean, hard body now, I could picture him storming a hillside on Guadalcanal, rifle in hand, bayonet fixed, grenades dangling from his belt, pumping bullets into the enemy. Then he was among us, and we surrounded him, crowding him, embracing him, getting as close to him as possible. "My hero from the war!" Joey LeBlanc called out, clowning of course, but saying what we all thought. Larry was our war hero, yes, but he had been a hero for us long before he went to war. He drew away, holding us off at arm's length, stepping back. "The better to see you," he said, looking at each of us in turn. When his eyes fell on me, I made a gesture as if serving the small white ball over the net, and he swiveled his arm as if returning the ball. His eyes moved to Nicole, and I saw the rush of affection on his face. Nicole bowed, tilting her head like a ballet dancer, and he dipped his head in return, his eyes full of her. A blush turned her cheeks crimson and only added to her beauty. Mayor Harold Burnham arrived in a big black car followed by city officials, most of whom walked the short distance from the city hall. Car horns blew and more cheers rose in the afternoon heat as the mayor vigorously shook Larry LaSalle's hand, embraced him fiercely, and presented him with a silver key to the city. "You are our celebration," the mayor declared, referring to the fact that holidays were observed quietly during the war years. No bonfires or fireworks, and no parades. "Your presence in this great city of ours, Lieutenant Lawrence LaSalle, is cause enough for jubilation." Other officials made speeches, and the words sailed over our heads meaninglessly, while Larry LaSalle stood modestly before the crowd, eyes lowered. Finally, a stillness fell, and he turned to the gathering. "Thank you," he said. He spoke of the men and women serving in all parts of the globe, who were defending freedom, and tells how some of them gave their lives willingly and courageously. He paused and looked down at us, his kids from the rec center. "I'm glad to be home, even if it's only for a little while." And most of all, I want to be with the rec center gang." Once again, he had made us feel special, singling us out from the townspeople who gathered there. Nicole squeezed my hand, and my eyes grew moist. "We have to keep the world safe for these young people. They are our future." The celebration went on during the afternoon and evening, culminating in a welcome home dance that night at City Hall. The hall was a bright spot in the dark wartime city, street lights dim, air raid wardens patrolling the peak of Moosoc Hill on the lookout for enemy planes, although an air attack on Monument was a remote possibility. But better be vigilant than sorry, said an editorial in the Monument Times. German U-boats had been sighted in the waters off Massachusetts shores, and rumors claimed that Nazis prowled the streets of New England in disguise. But City Hall blazed with lights behind the blackout curtains, and the big orchestra played the tunes of the day while the dancers twirled on the floor. We were a merry group, Larry LaSalle's guests at the dance. Sitting in a special section of the balcony, we looked down as he moved among the city officials and their wives, shaking hands, enduring slaps on the back, the embraces of beautiful women. I glanced occasionally at Nicole as she gazed, wide-eyed and wistful, at the ladies in their fancy gowns, glittery sequins catching the light from a crystal ball revolving on the ceiling. "Isn't that beautiful?" Nicole said, pointing to a woman in a simple white gown that clung to her body like whipped cream. "I'll buy you one like that some day," I whispered in her ear, my voice trembling a bit, betraying my love for her. Squeezing my hand, she leaned towards me, and her warm cheek rested against mine. Finally, Larry LaSalle looked up and motioned towards the front of the hall, meaning he wanted us to join him there. He met us at the entrance, the music muted in the background, and announced, "A surprise awaits." With a flourish, he led us outside and down the City Hall steps. He lined us up, and we began a wild snake dance through Monument Square among the statues of generals and the Civil War cannon and by the water fountain. Larry LaSalle headed the line. Nicole was next, with her hands on her hips, and mine on hers. We laughed and yelled and stopped at the fountain to drink and splash our faces, then crossed the intersection of Main and West and began to march down Mechanic Street, breaking ranks occasionally to pause and laugh as if we were all drunk without having taken a sip of liquor. Once, Nicole whispered, "Stay close to me," as we resumed our parade in the shadowed streets, and a thrill went through me like a jolt as I pulled her close and said, "I'll never leave you," as if we were living a love scene at the Plymouth. Finally, the big surprise was at hand as Larry led us along 3rd Street until we stood in front of the rec center. He bowed to us, produced a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and swung it open. "Voila!" he said, ushering us inside, and then told us he had arranged for Henry Roussier, the old retired janitor, to sweep and clean up the center for a special night. When Larry turned on the lights, we saw the ping-pong table, paddles and white balls on it, a table with cans of soda pop and candy bars, but not chocolate bars anymore because of wartime restrictions, but candy all the same. He placed a record on the phonograph, and the hall was filled with an old song from the bright and exciting days of the rec center, before the war, in the time of table tennis tournaments and Follies and Fancies musicals. "Never in a million years will there be another you." We played table tennis without keeping score, hitting the ball back and forth, trying for and sometimes making impossible shots, Larry rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, removing the medals and ribbons that he called scrambled eggs. We played game after game while Nicole changed the records and jitterbugged with Marie Lacroix. The evening wore down, and Joey LeBlanc and Louis Arabelle said good night, and later Marie and the others wandered off, until finally there was only Larry and Nicole and me. He embraced us both. "My favorite champion and my favorite dancer," he said. Fine dancing in the dark, he told Nicole. As she went off to search among the records, Larry placed his arm around my shoulder. Time to go home, Frances, he said. You look tired. It's been a long day. The day had not been long enough for me. I don't mind staying, I said. Nicole and I are going to have one last dance, he said. Just her and me. Alone. It's important, Frances. I wondered if he had a big announcement for her, that he had found a way to make her a star. Entertaining the troops, maybe. Nothing was impossible with Larry LaSalle. His face was flushed, and his eyes shone with excitement. So you better go. Okay. Nicole placed the record on the turntable and turned towards us, an expectant look on her face, glancing at Larry. I've got to go, I told her. You and Larry stay. One last dance. The words sounded false as I said them, and I realized they were Larry's words, not mine. Nicole frowned. Stay and watch, she said. And I was puzzled by the expression on her face. Was she only being polite, asking me to stay? Did she want to be alone with Larry? He went to her, placed his arm around her, drawing him to her gently. He's tired, Larry said. He wants to go. We always did what Larry LaSalle told us, always carried out his slightest wish, and now I seemed actually to be tired, as Larry suggested, the events of the day and all the excitement catching up with me. I saw Larry raising his eyebrows at me, the way he looked at me when I made a stupid move at table tennis. Get going. I'd better go, I said, keeping my eyes away from Nicole, a pang of regret gnawing at me even as I spoke, because I really wanted to stay, wanted to be part of them. As I turned away, I heard the plop the record made dropping onto the turntable, a patter of feet, then a hand touched my shoulder. Don't go, Nicole whispered in my ear. But Larry LaSalle had told me to go. No, I'd better leave, I said. I think he wants to tell you something. The first notes of Dancing in the Dark filled the air, and the singer sang, Dancing in the dark till the tune ends. Suddenly he was there, sweeping her into his arms, and as he did so, he reached out and flicked the switch, plunging the hall into darkness. I made my way towards the front door, but drew back, didn't leave, stationed myself in the small foyer in a slant of moonlight as the music filled the place, miserable in my aloneness, wanting to be dancing with her, the way Larry LaSalle was dancing with her, holding her close. In the shadows of the hallway, I stood in agony and waited for the song to end, and then I would tell Nicole that I had not left, that I had stayed, would never desert her, that she had told me not to go and I hadn't, that she was more important to me than Larry LaSalle. The song ended, and the scratching of the needle on the record did not stop, and I heard a sigh, and a sound that could have been a moan and a rustle of clothing. How long did I stand there listening, hearing the small sounds, then a sudden gasp and the needle scratching and the record went round and round and I couldn't breathe, my body rigid, my lungs burning, and at the moment of panic, heart thudding, my breath returned and I listened and heard nothing now. What were they doing? But I knew what they were doing. The thoughts streaked through my mind so fast that it could hardly be acknowledged. Then a whimpering, like a small animal caught and trapped. Moaning, distinct now. The scratching of the needle stopped, footsteps approaching, coming close, closer, and suddenly she stumbled into the hallway, her face caught in a slash of moonlight. She saw me the moment I saw her face, her eyes, her hair dishevelled, mouth flung open, lips swollen, cheeks moist with tears, her white blouse torn, and one hand clutching the front of her blouse to hold it together. I drew out of the darkness towards her, and she raised a hand to stop me, gasping now, her breath like a moan escaping her body. In the spill of the moonlight, her eyes flashed black with anger as she looked at me. More than anger. But what? What? I brought my hand up to my face, not to brush away my own tears, but to hide from her terrible gaze. But I couldn't cover my eyes, had to look at her, and I recognized in her eyes now what I could not deny. Betrayal. My betrayal of her in her eyes. For another long moment she stared at me, mouth still agape, then shook her head as if in disbelief, and fled towards the door, fumbling with the doorknob. She pulled the door open, stepped through, slamming the door behind her, while I stood there helplessly. Numbed, I stepped out of the moonlight's rays, wanting to hide in the dark. Larry's voice called from inside the hall. "Anybody there?" I stood, hushed, pressed to the wall. Heard my own breathing so harsh that I was afraid he could hear it. His footsteps grew louder as he approached. He passed through the flash of moonlight, a ghostly silhouette, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to see him. Then, no footsteps. Had he seen me? My eyes flew open. He was at the door, a shadow now, turning the knob, whistling a tune. Dancing in the dark, whistling softly as he stepped through the doorway, closing the door gently behind him, and went off into the night. I stood there, thinking of what I had seen in Nicole's eyes. It's amazing that the heart makes no noise when it cracks.